If I don't do something crazy right now, I'm going to disappear into the rain and never be found again. That thought was the only thing keeping me moving as I ran through the slick streets of Manhattan, my breath breaking apart in the cold night air, my heels slipping on wet pavement while my phone kept lighting up with a name I no longer wanted to see, my ex Emily Carter, 26. New York City was supposed to be where I built a life, not where I learned how fast it could fall apart. Behind me, I could feel the weight of him still chasing in my mind even if I didn't dare look back, every memory of his voice turning sharper the further I ran. I turned a corner too fast, nearly slipping, catching myself against a brick wall as rain poured down like the city itself was trying to wash me away. That's when I saw it, a glow through the glass doors of a private building I wasn't supposed to enter, a place too quiet, too expensive, too controlled to belong anywhere in my world. I didn't think, I just moved. I pushed inside, soaked and shaking, stepping into a completely different atmosphere where the noise of the city died instantly behind me. Soft golden lighting, polished floors, men in dark suits speaking in low voices that made the air feel heavier without a single word raised. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but then I saw him. Victor Romano. 65, standing at the center of the room like the space had been built around him instead of the other way around, silver streaks in his hair catching the light, posture calm in a way that made everyone else feel like they were moving too fast. He didn't look surprised to see me. That was the first thing that made my chest tighten. The second was the silence that followed me as I stepped forward, realizing too late that I didn't belong here. My ex's shadow felt closer somehow, even inside these walls, and panic made every thought collapse into one simple, reckless decision. Before I could stop myself, I crossed the distance and kissed him. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't planned, it was survival, one desperate act to erase the world behind me. For a second, everything stopped. The room, the air, even my heartbeat seemed to hesitate as I pulled back, realizing what I had just done. My breath caught as I looked up into Victor Romano's eyes, expecting anger, confusion, anything human I could understand. But there was nothing chaotic there. Only stillness. Control. Like I hadn't disrupted anything at all. Slowly, he lifted his hand, not touching me, just hovering near my face as if measuring a truth I didn't know I was revealing. Interesting choice, he said quietly, his voice calm enough to make my nerves tighten instead of settle. I tried to step back, but the space around me felt different now, like the room itself had shifted without moving. My mind screamed that I had made a mistake, a terrible one, but then I heard it. The doors behind me closed. Not slammed. Just closed. Deliberate. Final. And in that quiet, Victor Romano's gaze never left mine as he spoke again, softer this time, almost thoughtful. You didn't come here to escape him, he said. You came here to be seen. My stomach dropped, because somewhere deep down, I knew he was right, even if I didn't understand how he could possibly know it. The moment his words settled in the air, everything around me felt unfamiliar, like the room had quietly shifted while I was still trying to understand what I had just done. I stood there, my breath uneven, my hands cold from the rain still clinging to my skin, and I realized the silence was not empty at all. It was controlled, intentional, like it belonged to him rather than the space itself. Victor Romano did not move closer, did not raise his voice, did not react the way I expected anyone to react after something so impulsive. Instead, he simply watched me, as if I had just revealed something far more important than I understood. My throat tightened as I tried to speak, but no sound came out at first, only fragments of thoughts crashing into each other. I did not belong here. I knew that. Every instinct I had was screaming it at me now. I finally managed to step back, shaking my head slightly, trying to gather myself. I did not mean to, I whispered, my voice barely steady, it was not supposed to happen like that. Victor's expression did not change, but his attention sharpened in a way that made it feel like every word I spoke mattered more than I intended. Before he could respond, the atmosphere behind me shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in movement, a break in rhythm, then the sound of doors opening again, heavier this time, less controlled. I turned instinctively, and that was when I saw him. My ex stood at the edge of the entrance, soaked from the rain, eyes searching wildly until they locked onto me. Relief crossed his face first, then confusion, then something closer to anger when he noticed where I was standing. "Emily," he called out, stepping forward as if nothing had changed between us, as if I had not been running for my life only minutes before. My chest tightened instantly, panic rising again, but this time I was not outside in the open where I could disappear. I was inside something I did not understand, something that felt too structured, too powerful to simply run through. My ex took another step, but he stopped abruptly, as if hitting an invisible boundary he did not recognize. The men in dark suits around the room shifted slightly, not rushing, not reacting loudly, but positioning themselves in a way that felt deliberate. I felt it before I understood it. This was not his space anymore. Victor Romano finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly across the room. "You are late," he said, not looking at my ex immediately, but still acknowledging him as if he had already been accounted for. My ex frowned, confused, taking another step forward. "I do not know who you think you are," he said, trying to regain control of the moment, but his voice sounded smaller here, less certain. That was when Victor finally turned his attention toward him. It was not aggressive, not loud, just absolute. "You walked into a place you were not invited to," Victor said quietly, and in that instant, the air itself seemed to tighten. I felt my stomach drop because I understood, suddenly and clearly, that this was not about me anymore. My ex hesitated, sensing something he could not define, something that made him stop advancing. I stood between them without meaning to, caught in a space where every choice I thought I had just made was already being rewritten. Victor's eyes flicked briefly back to me, not asking, not judging, just observing. And in that silence, I realized something I did not want to admit. The kiss had not been the beginning of escape. It had been the beginning of being noticed by something I could not simply walk away from. The space between them felt heavier now, like every breath in the room had to pass through something unseen before reaching me. I could still feel the rain on my skin, but it no longer mattered, because nothing about this moment belonged to the world I had just run from. My ex stood near the entrance, frozen in a way I had never seen before, as if the confidence he usually carried had been stripped away the moment he stepped inside. "Emily," he said again, softer this time, like repeating my name could undo everything that had already shifted. I wanted to move, to step toward him, to explain something I did not even understand myself, but my body refused. It was not fear in the traditional sense anymore. It was awareness. Awareness that the rules had changed the moment I crossed that threshold. Victor Romano remained still, his presence quieter than anything else in the room, yet somehow holding all of it together. He did not look at my ex as a threat, nor as an intruder worth reacting to. He looked at him the way someone might look at a situation already decided. My ex finally forced a step forward again, his voice tightening. "I do not know what is going on here, but she is leaving with me." The words landed in the air, but they did not carry the same weight they used to. I could feel it instantly, the difference in how they were received. No one moved to support him. No one confirmed him. Even the room itself seemed to resist the idea. Victor finally turned his full attention toward him, and it was subtle at first, just a shift in posture, a quiet alignment of presence that made everything else feel smaller by comparison. "You are mistaken," Victor said calmly, his voice even, almost gentle, but carrying something that made it impossible to ignore. My ex hesitated, clearly unsettled, but still trying to hold on to control. "She is my girlfriend," he insisted, though the words now sounded uncertain even to him. There was a pause after that, long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat again, fast and uneven. Victor's gaze did not leave him. "That is not how this works," he said simply, as if explaining a fact that did not require argument. I felt something inside me tighten, because nothing about this felt like a confrontation, yet everything about it felt final. My ex looked around the room, searching for someone to validate him, but there was nothing. Only stillness. Only quiet attention that did not belong to him. I took a small step back without realizing it, unsure of where I was supposed to exist in this moment anymore. Victor noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes shifted slightly toward me, not questioning, but anchoring. And in that glance, I felt something I could not explain. Not safety. Not danger. Something in between that made it harder to move away. My ex tried again, his voice sharper now, but it cracked slightly under pressure he did not understand. "She is coming with me," he repeated, but it sounded more like a question than a statement this time. Victor exhaled slowly, almost as if he had already grown tired of the conversation. Then he spoke again, softer than before, but somehow more absolute. "You should leave before you embarrass yourself further," he said. The words were not loud, but they did not need to be. I saw it happen immediately. My ex stopped speaking. Not because he agreed, but because something in him finally recognized that continuing would not change anything. The realization came slowly across his face, like something breaking down in stages. I watched him look at me one last time, searching for the version of me that used to belong to him, but I was no longer standing in that place. I did not even know where I was standing anymore. Then he stepped back. Not quickly. Not angrily. Just slowly, as if distance itself was the only option left that still made sense. The room remained silent until he turned and walked out, disappearing into the rain again. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. When I finally exhaled, it felt like I had been underwater for far too long. I turned slightly, unsure of what to do next, and found Victor still watching me, unchanged by everything that had just happened. And in that moment, I understood something I was not ready to accept. I had not just escaped something behind me. I had stepped into something that had already decided it was no longer going to let me leave so easily. The moment the doors finally closed behind him, the room did not return to normal the way I expected it to. It stayed quiet, but not empty. It felt like something had been decided without me being fully included in the decision. I stood there, still trying to process what had just happened, my thoughts scattered between relief and confusion, both refusing to settle into anything stable. Victor Romano had not moved from his position since my ex left. That alone felt intentional. Like nothing in this space happened by accident, not even stillness. I slowly turned toward him, unsure whether I should speak or leave or simply disappear into the same direction my ex had gone, but none of those options felt available anymore. Victor finally stepped forward, not quickly, not aggressively, just with a calm certainty that made the distance between us feel shorter without him rushing it. "You should sit down," he said, not as an order, but as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I hesitated. Every instinct I had built over years of survival told me to keep distance, to keep moving, to not settle anywhere near someone I did not understand. But exhaustion was heavier than instinct now. My body betrayed my caution before my mind could fully resist. I lowered myself into one of the chairs near the edge of the room, still unsure if I had just made another mistake or simply delayed one. Victor remained standing for a moment longer, observing me in that quiet way he had, like he was not trying to read my fear, but the reason behind it. Then he finally spoke again. "You did not come here by choice," he said, his voice even, measured. That was not a question. I looked down at my hands, still trembling slightly, and tried to find words that made sense. "I do not even know where here is," I admitted softly. Almost frustrated at how true that was. That earned the faintest shift in his expression, not sympathy, not amusement, something closer to recognition. He finally sat across from me, placing a folded glass of water on the table between us like it had been waiting there the entire time. "You walked into a private circle of people who do not tolerate unpredictability," he said calmly. "And yet, you are still here." I swallowed, because I did not have an answer to that. I was not supposed to be here at all. I was supposed to be anywhere else, anywhere that did not involve men like him, or rooms like this, or decisions that changed the temperature of reality without warning. But I was here. My ex was gone. And the silence that followed him felt heavier than his presence ever did. Victor leaned slightly forward, his hands resting loosely, not threatening, not soft either. "There is something you do not understand yet," he said. "People do not enter my world by accident and remain unnoticed." My chest tightened at that, because I was beginning to understand exactly what he meant without wanting to. "I did not ask for this," I said quietly, my voice steadier now but still carrying uncertainty. He nodded once, as if acknowledging a detail that did not change the outcome. "Most people do not," he replied. The words should have comforted me, but they did not. Instead, they made everything feel more deliberate. More permanent. I looked toward the door my ex had disappeared through, expecting some sense of normal life to still exist on the other side of it, but it already felt distant, like it belonged to a different version of me. When I turned back, Victor was still watching, but now there was something different in his expression. Not curiosity anymore. Not assessment. Something closer to certainty. "You are safe for now," he said finally, but the way he said it made me realize safety here did not mean what it used to mean. It meant something conditional. Something temporary. Something held in place by forces I had not yet learned the shape of. And as I sat there, realizing I was no longer being chased by one world, but quietly held inside another, I understood that leaving might not be as simple as walking out the same door I came in through. The silence after his last words did not fade the way silence normally does. It stayed in the room, structured and intentional, like it had rules I had not been taught yet. I remained seated because standing suddenly felt like a decision I was not qualified to make. Victor Romano had not moved either, but somehow the distance between us no longer felt like space. It felt like definition. Like I had crossed into a version of reality where everything had names I did not know. I finally broke the quiet, my voice low but steadier than before. "What happens now?" I asked, and immediately regretted how small the question sounded in a place like this. Victor did not answer right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying me as if the question itself revealed more about me than my situation did. "Now," he said slowly, "depends on what you think just happened." I frowned slightly, because I did not understand the meaning behind that. "I thought I escaped something," I admitted. "My ex, my situation, everything." His expression did not change, but something in his gaze shifted subtly, like he had expected that answer and found it incomplete. "You did not escape anything," he said calmly. "You relocated." The words unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I looked down again, trying to process it, trying to find a version of events where I still had control over what was happening to me. "That is not the same thing," I said quietly. Victor nodded once. "No," he agreed. "It is not." Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Less like emptiness, more like waiting. I finally looked up at him again. "Why did you stop him?" I asked. The question came out more honest than I intended. Victor tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether the answer mattered. "Because he did not belong here," he said simply. That explanation should have reassured me, but instead it made my stomach tighten. I realized then that I still did not understand where here was. Or what rules defined it. I pressed carefully, and I do not belong here either. For the first time, something almost like faint acknowledgement crossed his expression. "That is still undecided," he said. The honesty of it made my chest tighten again. I stood slowly this time, because sitting any longer felt like surrendering without knowing the terms. Victor watched me, but did not stop me. I took a small step back, then another, testing the space between us like it might change without warning. "I do not know what you think you are doing," I said, more to myself than to him. He stood as well, but not in response to my movement. It felt more like timing than reaction. "I think," he said calmly, "that you walked into a situation that requires decisions you have not made yet." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else he had said. I turned slightly toward the exit, my instincts finally reasserting themselves, but something stopped me before I could fully move. Not force, not command. Awareness. I looked back at him. "If I leave," I said carefully, "what happens?" Victor's gaze did not waver. "That depends on whether you are already part of this," he replied. The answer should have been simple, but it was not. I suddenly realized that my life outside this building, my job, my apartment, even my sense of normal fear, all felt further away than they should have. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I stood there between leaving and staying, between what I understood and what I did not. Victor did not pressure me. He simply waited, as if time itself had already chosen a direction and was only waiting for me to notice it. And for the first time since I had run into that rain, I understood something unsettling. I was no longer reacting to danger. I was being evaluated by something that did not move until it decided I would. The moment I stopped speaking, the room felt like it had shifted its attention from what had happened to what would happen next. Victor Romano did not move closer, yet I could feel that I was no longer being observed as an outsider. It was something more precise, like I had been placed under a quiet evaluation that did not require my permission. I stood near the edge of the room, unsure if I was still allowed to leave, and that uncertainty alone made every instinct I had feel unreliable. Victor finally broke the silence, his voice calm in a way that made it difficult to argue with. "You are not in danger right now," he said, but the way he paused after those words made it clear there was more to that sentence than comfort. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. "Then what am I in?" I asked, because nothing about this situation matched anything I understood. He studied me for a moment longer before answering. "Awareness," he said simply. That answer did not help as much as I wanted it to, because awareness was not a place I could leave or stay. It was something I had already entered without realizing. I looked around the room again, noticing details I had missed before, the way people moved with quiet discipline, the way conversation stopped when Victor shifted his attention, the way even silence here seemed organized. I realized I was not being ignored anymore. I was being accounted for. Victor stepped slightly to the side, gesturing not at me directly but toward the space between us. "Your ex will not return here," he said. The statement should have felt like reassurance, but instead it landed like confirmation that something larger than my personal life had already taken shape around me. I swallowed, my voice lower now. "You are making decisions about my life without asking me," I said carefully. He did not deny it. Instead, he answered with something that sounded almost like logic. "You made a decision when you entered this building and made yourself visible inside it." I felt a strange tension rise in my chest because part of me knew he was not wrong, even if I did not like the way it sounded. I had acted without understanding consequences, and now consequences were acting without me. I took a slow step back again, testing whether the door still meant what I thought it meant. Victor watched that movement but did not stop me. Instead, he spoke again, quieter this time. "There are people who saw you tonight," he said. "People who now associate you with this moment." That sentence changed something in the air between us. Not fear exactly, but wait. I suddenly understood that my ex had not been the end of anything. He had only been the beginning of visibility I did not ask for. I turned my head slightly toward the exit, but I did not move toward it. Something about the way Victor spoke made leaving feel less like escape and more like separation from something I did not yet understand. "I do not know what you expect from me," I said finally, and for the first time my voice sounded less defensive and more uncertain. Victor's answer came after a pause that felt intentional. "I expect you to understand what you are part of before you decide what you want to leave," he said. The word "part" lingered in my mind longer than anything else he had said. I realized then that nothing here was being rushed, nothing was accidental, and nothing was unaware of me anymore. And as I stood there, caught between the life I thought I had left and the one that was quietly forming around me, I understood something I did not want to accept. I was no longer trying to escape a moment. I was being positioned inside one. For a long moment after I spoke, Victor Romano did not answer, and the silence between us felt different than before. It was no longer uncertainty filling the space. It was structure. Like the conversation itself had entered a stage where words were carefully measured instead of freely exchanged. I stood still, my hands loosely pressed together, trying to steady the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something I could no longer fully step away from. Victor finally shifted his gaze slightly, not away from me, but past me, as if thinking beyond the room we were in. "You are trying to understand this as if it is about choice," he said quietly. I frowned slightly, because everything in my mind still revolved around that idea. "What else could it be?" I asked. His eyes returned to me, steady and unchanging. "Position," he said simply. That word did not help me. It made everything feel more distant, less personal, and somehow more unavoidable at the same time. I shook my head slightly, taking a careful step closer to the chair again without fully sitting down. "I do not understand what position I am supposed to have," I admitted. Victor studied me for a moment longer, then answered in a way that felt more like explanation than conversation. "You entered a space where people are recognized by impact, not intention," he said. "My ex did not belong here because he lacked both. You do not belong here because you are unplaced." I felt a tightness in my chest at that, not because it was cruel, but because it was precise in a way I was not prepared for. Unplaced sounded worse than unwanted. It sounded like I had no defined edges at all. I looked down briefly, then back up at him. "I am not part of anything," I said quietly. Victor nodded once, as if acknowledging a stage of understanding rather than agreeing or disagreeing. "That is correct for now," he said. The phrase "for now" lingered in my mind more than anything else. It suggested movement, not permanence. But movement in a direction I did not control. I finally sat down again, slower this time, my body reacting before my thoughts could fully align. The room around us remained still, but it no longer felt empty. It felt observed, as if every detail had significance I was not yet trained to read. Victor remained standing for a few seconds longer before speaking again. "There are people who will assume things about you now," he said. "Not because of what you did, but because of where you were when it happened." I felt a quiet discomfort rise in me. "That does not sound like something I can control," I replied. Victor's expression softened only slightly, but his tone stayed even. "It is not something you control," he confirmed. "It is something you learn to navigate." I leaned back slightly in the chair, trying to process the idea that my life had shifted into something that required navigation instead of simple decisions. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass walls of the building, the city continued without pause, but inside this space, everything felt paused around me. I looked at Victor again, searching for something more familiar in his expression, but there was nothing I recognized. Only certainty. And in that certainty, I understood something I had been avoiding since I first walked in. I was no longer standing at a doorway between leaving and staying. I was already inside something that would define the meaning of both. The silence that followed felt different from anything I had experienced before that night. It was no longer the silence of confusion or fear, but the silence of realization slowly settling into place. I sat in the chair without moving, my hands resting loosely in my lap, while Victor Romano stood a few feet away as if distance itself was part of how he measured the world. Nothing in me felt fully settled anymore. Even my thoughts seemed to move more carefully, like they were learning the rules of a place I had not agreed to enter but could no longer deny I was inside. Victor finally spoke again, his voice calm in a way that did not ask for agreement. "You are thinking in terms of escape," he said. I looked up at him, tired of trying to translate everything into something familiar. Then what am I supposed to think in terms of, I asked. He did not answer immediately, and that pause felt intentional, not uncertain. Finally he stepped slightly closer, not invading space, but defining it. Consequence, he said simply. I let out a slow breath because that word felt heavier than everything else he had said so far. Consequence meant permanence in a way escape never did. I shook my head slightly, trying to ground myself in something normal, something that belonged to the life I had before this night. I did not plan for any of this, I said quietly. Victor nodded once, as if that detail had no impact on the structure of what was happening. Most people do not, he replied. That does not change what follows. I felt my chest tighten again, not from fear exactly, but from the realization that my explanations no longer held weight here. I slowly stood again, needing movement to keep my thoughts from collapsing inward. If I walk out of here, I said carefully, what changes? Victor studied me for a long moment before answering. Everything and nothing, he said. The contradiction made me frown. That is not an answer, I said. It is, he replied calmly, just not the kind you are used to. I turned slightly toward the direction of the exit again, but this time I did not move. Something about the way he spoke made leaving feel like an incomplete action, not a solution. Victor continued, his tone steady. The man you came here to avoid is no longer relevant to your position, he said. My breath caught slightly at the wording. Position again. That word was beginning to define more than I was comfortable with. I looked back at him. And what is my position? I asked, my voice quieter now. Victor's gaze held mine, unchanging. That is what you will understand over time, he said. Not all answers are given in the moment they are asked. I felt a strange tension in my chest, because part of me wanted to reject everything he was saying, but another part of me had already stopped trying to argue with reality as it was unfolding. I sat down again slowly, not because I agreed, but because standing felt less useful than understanding. The room felt the same, but I did not. Something had shifted in the way I was allowed to exist inside it. Victor finally stepped back slightly, as if giving the space permission to feel like space again instead of pressure. You are not being held here, he said quietly. That statement should have relieved me, but it did not fully. Instead, it made me realize that staying and leaving no longer felt like opposites. They felt like different forms of the same unknown. I looked down at my hands again, then slowly back up at him. And for the first time since I had run into the rain, I understood that my life was no longer defined by what I was running from, but by what I had already stepped into without realizing there would be no simple way to step back out. The air in the room felt different now, not because anything had changed physically, but because something inside me had reached a point of acceptance I did not consciously choose. I sat there quietly, my eyes no longer scanning for exits or possibilities, but simply taking in what was in front of me as it was. Victor Romano remained standing near the edge of the space, as if distance was not separation but structure. He was not watching me with urgency or expectation anymore. It felt more like observation without pressure, as if my reaction was already part of something he had accounted for long before I understood any of it. I finally spoke, my voice softer now, less resistant than before. If I stay, I said slowly, what happens to me? Victor did not respond immediately, and that pause again felt deliberate, not uncertain. When he finally answered, his tone carried the same calm precision I had started to recognize as his normal way of speaking. Then you learn how this world actually works, he said. I looked at him, trying to find something in his expression that resembled manipulation or persuasion, something I could reject, but there was nothing theatrical about him. Only clarity. I do not want to become part of anything dangerous, I said honestly. Victor nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without challenging it. Danger is not the correct definition, he replied. That made me pause because it did not match anything I had experienced so far, yet it also did not feel like a lie. I stood again, slower this time, walking a few steps toward the glass wall of the room. Outside, the city lights of Manhattan stretched endlessly, indifferent and alive, as if none of this existed in its rhythm. I felt strangely disconnected from the version of myself that had been running through rain not long ago. That person felt like she belonged to another timeline entirely. Victor's voice came from behind me, steady and close enough to hold attention without demanding it. "The man you were running from will not return to your life," he said again, but this time it sounded less like reassurance and more like a statement of fact that had already been processed. I turned slightly back toward him. "How can you decide that?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze without hesitation. "Because decisions were already made the moment you entered a system you did not recognize," he said. I felt a strange stillness settle in my chest, not fear, not relief, something more complicated. I realized I was no longer arguing against what was happening. I was trying to understand its structure. And understanding, I was beginning to see, was its own kind of entry point. I looked back toward the door again, but my body did not move toward it. That realization surprised me more than anything else. Victor noticed. Of course he did. "You are not being forced," he said calmly. "But you are being observed because your presence here has weight now." The word weight stayed with me longer than anything else. It suggested permanence, responsibility, consequence without clarity. I turned back toward him fully this time. "And if I decide to leave?" I asked. Victor's expression did not change, but something in his tone shifted slightly, as if the answer already existed regardless of my question. "Then you leave understanding less than you do now," he said. The simplicity of it made it harder to dismiss. I stood there in silence again, realizing that every direction I imagined still led me back to this same moment of uncertainty. The life I had been running from no longer felt accessible in the same way, and the life I was standing in had not yet offered itself as something I could name. Victor finally spoke one last time, quieter than before. "You will either adapt to what you have entered, or you will spend your time trying to escape something that is no longer behind you," he said. And in that moment, I understood something that made everything feel irreversible. I was no longer outside of this world looking in. I was already inside it, and it was already deciding how I would exist within it.